Welcome to Let the Boys Kiss, the creation of queer ships, where we ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
This week we'll be discussing John Bucky Egan and Gale Buck Clevin from Masters of the Air. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kelsey.
Buck and also Bucky, you say?
Not confusing at all. And it's not like there's any other characters and ships we've covered named Buck and Bucky.
No, that certainly hasn't happened more than once already over the course of this podcast. The most popular nickname of all time.
So, this was a listener suggestion. Thanks as always for sending in your suggestions. And we will be covering John Bucky Egan and Gale Buck Clevin from Masters of the Air. But we're also going to talk about a couple of other things in this podcast.
Yes. What? That's not like us. As many listeners of this podcast presumably know, we have another podcast devoted to the Oscars, where we watch Oscars Best Picture nominees. And over the course of that podcast, leading up to this, we have discovered a couple of pictures that felt applicable, that we felt like we needed to talk about in a similar vein to Masters of the Air.
Yes. So we will also be talking about the movie Wings from 1927.
The first winner of Best Picture.
The first Academy Award Best Picture winner. Available on YouTube if you want to watch it.
Yep.
The ship there is Jack Powell and David Armstrong. They don't even have nicknames.
No. Strong names, though.
And we will also be covering Test Pilot from 1938, where the ship is Jim Lane, Gunnar Morse, and Anne Thursday Barton. She has a nickname.
She does. And I have to imagine Gunnar is a nickname.
Oh, you don't think that's his birth name?
Yeah, I can't say for sure. It feels like it might be a nickname.
Now, some of this is kind of kismet, because we did Wings and Test Pilot this past season.
Yep.
And coming into watching Masters of the Air, there are multiple Test Pilot references in Masters of the Air.
Yep.
So it had not been for our Oscars podcast, I think we would have just blazed right past those references. But when they came up, we were like, whoa.
Whoa. We get that reference, and we'd like to talk more about it. So here we are. It is funny how often things work out like that, though, timing-wise, with our random podcast. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, would you look at that? It's all applicable.
Great.
Yes,
So,
yes.
We're going to go through these in chronological order.
Both chronological in terms of the release of the thing, but also the time period in which it takes place.
It's true. Wings, being from 1927, is about fighter pilots in World War I.
Because World War II hadn't happened yet. You that sounds obvious, but people, it's very confusing. When you're watching war media, your head automatically goes to World War II. The whole time you're spending thinking like, okay, this is not World War II. They're not Nazis. Keep all this in mind.
Right. When you're watching Wings and you see the Iron Cross and you're like, oh yeah, it's not a swastika because they're not Nazis, because it's World War I.
Correct.
Because World War II has not happened yet. Now, Test Pilot 1938 is still pre-U.S. involvement in World War II.
And it takes place after World War I, between the wars.
Because it's about test pilots.
Not war pilots, test pilots.
They're testing planes.
Yes.
And then, yes, obviously Masters of the Air takes place during World War II.
Which is not confusing at all. It's easy to remember that you're in World War II.
Because that's what your brain always thinks you're in.
Every war movie is World War II until proven otherwise.
Until Vietnam, and then it's Vietnam.
Yes, but Vietnam movies feel very different from World War II movies. World War I movies don't feel that different.
Yes, but that's how U.S. history goes. World War II happened, and then Vietnam happened. You say, what about Korea? And you're like,
Didn't
that's
happen.
Not a thing.
And Vietnam is the end of history. Nothing else happened after that.
No.
Anyway,
Okay.
Off that tangent, we're going to start with Wings. So,
Yes.
tell me the basic plot of Wings, and then we will get into the shippy.
Okay, so Wing starts out with these two guys in small town America, Jack and David. David comes from money. Jack is not like poor, but he's not rich.
Yeah.
And there's a girl from the city in town who they both have a thing for. Jack also has a neighbor, Mary, who has a thing for him.
Who's Clara Bow, and somehow he's looking right past her.
Yeah. So Jack is in love with this woman, Sylvie. David's in love with this woman, Sylvie. Sylvie's in love with David. Jack, before he leaves for war, goes to Sylvie and is like, I love you. And he thinks that she has like prepared a locket for him, but that's really for David, but he takes it.
He's like, oh my God, I didn't know you cared. Thanks so much.
And so the boys go off to war. At first, there's conflict between them, but then they get into a boxing match. And then because they've had a little bit of a fist fight, now they're best friends.
As boys are.
As boys are. And so now when they go out and fly missions, they have a whole ritual as they do it. David has a good luck charm, which is a tiny little bear. It's very
So cute.
And they go like all set, and the other one's like all set. And then they look at each other, and then they fly their missions.
Mm-hmm. What you'll notice going forward, everyone, is that fighter pilots have to have a ritual and have to have a good luck charm. These are the only ways that they can fly. Otherwise, things go very wrong.
It's true. It's just factual. Mm-hmm. And so, movie's going along, blah, 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 blah.
War happens, da-da-da.
War happens, many missions. Mary becomes a driver, then she has to go home because they think she's a slut. Like, there's a bunch going on. Don't worry about it.
It happens. Come on. Who among us has not been there?
There's a mission coming up, and David is feeling a little morose. He's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it back from this one. And we're getting towards the end of the war. And Jack is talking about his locket, and he hands the picture of Sylvie to David. And David looks at the back, and written on the back is like, to David, with all my love, Sylvie.
And David has spent the whole war hiding from Jack that Sylvie loves David and not Jack because he just doesn't want to hurt his feelings. So he has like a letter from Sylvie saying, Jack still thinks I'm in love with him. Can you believe that guy? He's just like hiding the whole thing from David.
And so in order to protect Jack's feelings, David rips up the picture because Jack wants him to hand it back to him before he puts it back in the locket. And so Jack is like, I thought we were friends. I can't believe you would do this to me. I can't believe you would care about Sylvie over our friendship, bro.
Yeah, it's messed up.
And so they go out to fly their mission. David forgets his good luck bear. And then he gets into the plane. He's trying to do the all set with Jack, but Jack is too upset. And so he doesn't do the all set with David. And they fly the mission. David gets shot down by some German pilots. And when he lands, he's shot by some Germans, and they think they've killed him. And so they send a letter back to camp being like, we got one of your pilots. He's dead. And Jack is, of course, morose. He'd spent the night before crying and trying as he was waiting for David to come back. It's very sweet when he gets the letter. His superior officer puts his arm around him and walks him back to the camp.
He turns to the officer and just sort of like slumps like, oh.
Yeah. But it turns out David's not dead. He survived. Jack has gone out to fly more missions to get revenge against these horrible Germans for taking down his boy.
He's gonna take down as many, whatever he calls them, heinies as he can.
David is able to commandeer a German plane to try to fly back to his territory. And basically the war is over at this point. And so he's headed back to American lines. And Jack spots him, but obviously he doesn't know it's David.
It's a German plane.
It's a German plane, and his heart is so filled with vengeance. He shoots him down.
As David is yelling out to him, Jack, don't you know me, Jack?
Oh, God, it's so sad. Really and he crashes into this, like, house in France. And Jack lands, and he's so excited. And he's taking the Iron Cross off the plane as, like, a souvenir. And then this French woman is there, and she's like, the young man you shot down is about to die. Come see him. Come, he's so young. And Jack goes in, and he sees that it's David.
Oh, no.
And, of course, he is distraught. He runs to him. He wraps his arms around David. David wraps his arms around Jack. He's crying into his chest, his neck. And there, we should read, I guess, the dialogue of David's death scene.
Yes, we have the scene. We can do a dramatic reenactment.
Yes.
You want it to be David or Jack?
Sure, I'll be David. Now, We should say, too, like, we're going to read this to you. There's no dialogue. It's a silent film.
Yes, I mean, a lot of these anything that we have, like, actual words for is one of the little, like, cards.
Title cards, yeah.
Yeah, but there are also times when they say something You can read their lips, but it's not a title card. There's that going on too. But
Yeah.
we're not hearing them say this.
I don't think we mentioned this is a silent film.
Well, it's 1927. People are smart.
People might not know when talkies came into fashion off the tops of their heads.
Okay, well, now they do.
So David says, I stole the plane. I thought maybe I could get across enemy lines.
Dave, you're badly hurt. I'll get a doctor.
Then there's a French soldier in the room who says, if it were any use, myself would have gone. It is only minutes, monsieur. C'est la guerre.
C'est la guerre.
And David says, don't go, Jack. Just stay here with me for a while.
And Jack is like burying his head in his neck, hugging him. It's very, he's trying to comfort him as much as he can. And he says, oh, Dave, I was trying to get just one more hiney for you.
Don't, Jack. Oh, please don't. It wasn't your fault. You didn't shoot me, Jack. You did bring down a hiney ship. Don't you see?
And Jack gives David a kiss on the side of his mouth, and then we cut to a French lady who I believe it's her house. She's just watching the two of them and crying like, wow, this is so sad.
And it is.
And Jack says, Dave, I didn't mean what I said about the picture, don't you? You know there's nothing in the world that means so much to me as your friendship.
And they're rubbing each other's heads with their hands through their hair. Dave says, I knew it all the time. And then he does like their little sign off. All set?
All set?
And then he dies.
Poor Jack is distraught. And he's just like crying into his body. And then finally he's like, all right, I gotta take him home now. So he picks him up and carries him, like a bride out the door. And lays him in a cart, and then he's helping push the cart up the hill, and he takes off his jacket and he lays it over him.
Oh, it's so sad.
It's incredibly sad.
And so Jack goes back and he sees the letter that Sylvie wrote that was like, can you believe Jack thinks I'm in love with him? And he sees he had taped the picture back together, so he sees it was dedicated to David. And he realizes, of course, that David was just protecting his feelings.
He's been protecting his feelings the whole time.
He really cared the most about their friendship.
He did say that.
Yeah. And then this is not quite about their relationship, but just because the ending of this movie is so sad, Jack also comes home as like a war hero.
They're parading him in the streets.
He has to go to David's parents and give them David's medal that he was awarded and the little bear.
And David's parents, who never wanted him to go to war because they're rich and rich sons shouldn't go to war, sitting there like all ready to be mad. But Jack comes in and he's just like weeping as he tries to apologize to them. And David's mother sits down and Jack goes over and just buries his head in her lap and is crying. And she's like, I wanted to blame you, Jack, but I can't. It's war, Yeah.
So sad.
It's really sad.
So we talked about this on our Oscars podcast. This movie is quite long. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. It is a silent film. The first hour 20, hour 40 is like too stretched out. This is all happening in the last 40 minutes to an hour. But damn, the last 40 minutes to an hour of Wings is compelling.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the war stuff, too, is awesome. What we cut over through all of this retelling is there is battle stuff happening on the ground. It's shot so coolly. You're like, how did they do this? It's 1927. What was the budget on this thing was all I was thinking. There are these crazy overhead shots of huge battlefields with like lots of trenches and men running around and bombs are going off. It's like, this is incredible production. I don't know how they got this done.
And also, like, there's too many missions in the beginning of the movie, but the way they shoot the planes flying around is incredible. And the cuts from, like, you'll be in the plane looking down at the ground, and then you'll cut to the ground, you'll see the plane strafe down, and then
it's awesome.
It feels very modern, and you're like, how is this 1927? They just started flying planes.
Yeah, well, they were still in that. There's that interesting moment in film history where with the silent cameras, and in this in particular, they'd figured out how to do a lot of cool camera work. There are interesting tracking shots and all sorts of stuff. And I'm sure they had the cameras in the planes and they were able to do all this stuff because the cameras were small. And then when sound came in, the cameras got really big and all of a sudden the camera work started looking really boring again when the talkies started. So this was at a moment when they were able to do some really interesting stuff with their cameras.
They'd gotten so far along in like camera work and film language, and they
Yeah.
had to reset once the talkies came in, and it took a while for them to get back to a place where things were this mobile, but it was cool.
It looks great. I mean, it's a very cool movie. It isn't perfect, but there's a lot of awesome stuff in it, and it's a piece of film history. The first Best Picture.
Mm-hmm. And the ending is so sad.
And the ending is so sad. And the pilots, they just love each other so much.
They do. Yeah, when I watched it and I got to the end of them clutching each other, I was like, there's gotta be Wings fanfic on AO3. And there's not a lot, and we will get to it, but there is some.
There is some. It does exist.
There should be more.
Wings.
Oh,
all right.
Jack and David.
Jack and David.
Small bear.
I mean, David is just such a mensch. Like, through the
nicest
whole
boy.
war, Jack is trying to hate him early on because he's like, this guy's trying to steal my girl. He doesn't like him at all. And David is just so unfailingly nice to him that, like, he wears him down. They do have to have a fist fight because,
They're
whatever.
boys.
They're boys. But then he's like, you know what? You're my best friend. David's like, yeah, I am your best friend. Very, very sweet.
Okay.
Okay. That's Wings.
Now you tell me about Test Pilot.
Test Pilot. So in Test Pilot, Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy are BFFs. It's between the wars. Clark Gable they're both pilots, I think, but Clark Gable is the test pilot and Spencer Tracy is his engineer who keeps his plane functioning because the planes they're testing are often just falling apart because they're new. And so they lead this lifestyle at the beginning where Clark Gable he has a flight in the morning, but at night he's out romancing the ladies and bringing them home. He's got
And on a date and forgetting he had another date. Oh boy.
And Spencer Tracy, who is his roommate / best friend, is there to like clean up after him in all of his romantic entanglements. And this is their dynamic. And then on one flight across the country, Clark Gable has to take an emergency landing in a field in Kansas, I think. Yeah. And while he's there, he meets this girl who lives on the farm, played by Myrna Loy, and she's just like the coolest girl. And he's like, I gotta be with this girl. So he falls in love with her there. And Spencer Tracy has to come out and bring him the parts he needs for his plane. And they're supposed to just leave her there. But instead, he gets married to her. Mm-hmm. And he brings her out to New York where they live. And then it becomes, how are we going to make this arrangement work? She at first thinks it's really cool that he's a test pilot, and then someone dies during a race, and she realizes it's actually very dangerous to be a test pilot. And so she and Spencer Tracy are bonded together in their feelings about Clark Gable and like, how do we live with the fact that he could die at any moment? So they're having a lot of conversations about that. And then eventually there's a mission where Spencer Tracy and Clark Gable are flying it together. Clark Gable, who's always has to push everything to the limit, ends up pushing the plane a little bit too far. Bad stuff happens. Spencer Tracy gets killed on the flight.
Like, it's very injured on the flight.
Yes. They crash land. They have the same sort of thing where he dies in his arms. We'll talk about the specifics of everything later. And then he goes back home to Myrna Loy, who's like, I wish you had died, because now I'm still going to have to wait around for you to die. And Spencer Tracy already did. And because of this, he is able to quit being a test pilot, decide he's going to start training pilots instead so that he doesn't make his wife a widow.
A double widow.
A double widow. And that's the arc of Test Pilot, but we can talk about the little moments because some of these moments are unhinged in this movie. I don't know what they were trying to do when they made the movie, but it's clear what they've achieved.
So we should probably start with their housing challenges.
So, yes, we have to sort out a place to live. The man's married now. He's been a bachelor. And we find out that Spark. I've discovered a ship name for Spencer Tracy and Clark Gable.
Oh, that's pretty good.
We find out that Spencer and Clark's characters, because they move around so much, don't have a stable place to live. They just rent a room together and they go from place to place. So they have to find a place now. They go to rent an apartment. They find a place that they like, and Spencer Tracy is like, all right, guys, so I guess I'll be on my way to go. I'll visit you occasionally. And Clark Gable's like, where the hell are you going? This is your bedroom. You live here with us. Mm-hmm. Which is You know, the arrangement every newlywed wants usually is that their best friend lives in the apartment with them.
Yeah.
And then
It's interesting too, because when they're talking about their housing woes, Clark's like, "Oh, I know a nice place," and so he had this place in mind. He was like, 2 bedrooms.
yes, he's been planning for the two of them to get a nice place together, but this just gives him the excuse.
Yeah.
So as soon as they're moved in, Spencer Tracy starts being like, Clark, you've got a new wife. You've got to treat her nicely. She's your bride. She doesn't even have any clothes. You just picked her up out of Kansas. You got to go get her a nightgown. Mm-hmm. And so Clark's like, okay, great idea. And all three of them go to the department store together to get this nightgown. And somehow the arrangement becomes Myrna Loy standing to the side watching the two of them at the nightgown counter try to order a nightgown for her. And Clark Gable, the only way he can communicate to this woman selling him a nightgown what size he needs is to be like, about his size to Spencer Tracy.
And when she hands him a nightgown, he holds it up against Spencer Tracy to be like, yeah, that seems right. And the woman at the counter is like, okay.
There's no way this woman does not think that the nightgown is for Spencer Tracy.
Clark Gable, okay, she's like, what color? And he's like, Spencer, what color?
Yeah, Spencer's the one who should choose. Spencer, the one who's ostensibly not in this relationship at all, is the one who should choose. So they pick it, they buy this very expensive nightgown, and Myrna Loy is just like giggling at them the entire time. And that was the moment when I was like, oh, I'm here for this dynamic. I love the three of them.
Yeah, and then they go back home after buying the nightgown, and Spencer's like, all right, well, I'll go back to our old place and pick up our clothes. I'll see you in the morning. And Myrna Loy's like, don't leave.
Where are you going?
let me help you figure out how to like me.
Yeah, she's like, I don't want us to not get along. I need you to care about me. What do I do?
Huh.
The three of them are amazing.
And then Spencer is like, it'll be nice to have someone else put him to bed.
Yeah, he's done that enough in his life. So that's just the setting up of the dynamic. But then things get real.
Yes. So Clark Gable has quit his job because when he came back from not coming back in time with his wife, he was like, I'm going to go on a honeymoon. And his boss was like, I need you to fly a mission like in 2 days. And he's like, nah, I'm taking a week off. And his boss is like, well, then you're fired. And he's like,
okay,
cool. I guess I'm fired. And so, he decides to fly for a different guy in the big race. Mm-hmm. We meet a nice man.
Yeah, right before the race, we meet the loveliest man with the loveliest family that you ever did meet, who happens to be flying in Clark Gable's spot. And wouldn't you know it, he dies in the race.
Oh, but he was going to take his family to Italy with the winnings.
I know.
His wife and his 2 small children.
So he dies, and this has a lot of repercussions. Whenever a pilot dies, it reminds all of the other pilots of their own mortality, which none of them want to be reminded of. And it also makes it real for Myrna Loy's character that being a test pilot is actually quite dangerous. And so we get these different dynamics happening. Clark Gable's character, first he gives half of his winnings to the widow, which is very sweet in a lovely way, he does. And then he goes on a bender for like 3 days or something, and he spends all $5,000 of his winnings, which is not easy to do in 1938. Meanwhile,
very impressive.
Spencer Tracy and Myrna Loy have had this like, okay, you have to realize that things are real now. He's in danger, and Spencer Tracy goes off to find him, and he has to track him through like 4 different Midwest cities on his multi-day bender. And finally he finds him, and he brings him back home. And they get back to the apartment, and Clark Gable is worried to confront Myrna Loy because he's like, she's going to be mad, isn't she? Like, this probably wasn't great. And he's afraid to go into her bedroom to have the conversation. He's like, why don't you come with me? Spencer Tracy's like, I'm not coming into your wife's bedroom to have this conversation. But of course, he goes into her bedroom. She wakes up, and she's like, oh, is Spencer Tracy here? Yeah, okay, let's go have this conversation out in the living room. Because they're a threesome. All decisions must be made together. And so what comes of this is she decides, okay, I'm going to put on a brave face and stay with you, and it's all going to be fine. But she has a conversation when Clark Gable is gone with Spencer Tracy about the future and what they think is going to happen. And they decide there's these 3 possible roads that are like, 1, I confront him and make him quit his job, and then he hates me. 2, da-da-da. 3, I just pretend everything's fine, but I am sure he's going to die someday, whatever the 3 roads are. And all 3 roads lead to doom. And the 2 of them agree with each other. Yes, all 3 roads lead to doom, but here we are on the roads because they can't quit him, you know?
They can't. And then this is when they go on their date together to Coney Island.
Very cute.
Very sweet. It is, too, after the big race that the director really starts framing Myrna Loy and Spencer Tracy together almost exclusively. Like, when they're watching him fly, they're in the same shot, and they're, like, you know, shoulder to shoulder. But also there are, like, dialogue scenes. So in that scene where Clark Gable comes back, and it's, like, shot, reverse shot, it's nothing, like, super complicated, but Clark Gable is in one of the shots, and then when it reverse shots to the conversation he's having with Myrna Loy, Spencer Tracy's sitting right next to her over her shoulder.
They're always, like, overlapped in frame. The 2 of them are one.
So, you know, not just the story and the dialogue, but in the filmmaking, they're like, this is a single relationship that Clark Gable has.
So, yeah, there's a lot of that. What ends up happening is stupid Clark Gable pushing the plane too far.
Well, also, as you mentioned in our last discussion, Spencer Tracy has this habit of taking gum out of his mouth and attaching it to, it's not like the shark's fin of a plane.
The tail or whatever. Like, he puts it on the... So, yeah, when he's sending their ritual, as all pilots have to have rituals, Clark Gable's in the cockpit, Spencer Tracy's outside. He blows him a kiss from outside the plane. And then he takes his gum out of his mouth. He sticks it to the plane for good luck. And so, yes, the 2 of them now are going to fly a mission together, which we haven't seen before. And everything goes wrong. Everything always goes wrong before the fated missions. And Spencer Tracy, there's no kiss blowing. He has gum in his mouth. He spits it out on the ground.
Why?
He leaves his luck on the ground.
Just keep it in your mouth, Spencer.
And the 2 of them go up on this flight. And you're like, I got a bad feeling about this flight.
Now, they're testing like a bomber. So in order to replicate the weight of the bombs, it is full of sandbags.
And the sandbags are all strapped down on these big pallets. But there's nothing like on the sides of the pallets. It's just these huge stacks of sandbags with straps over them.
And so when Clark Gable pushes it, the sandbags start to come out of their little strappies and move around, and they come through the cockpit and they crush Spencer Tracy. It's horrific. He's
Clark,
very good at dying, though.
How dare you not realize that you were responsible for not just your own life, but also Spencer Tracy's life? Come on. So he's crushed, and it's bad. And they're trying to crash land the plane while Clark Gable is trying to pull these sandbags off of Spencer Tracy. And it's not going well. Spencer's still alive, but he's, like, heavily, damaged. They make it onto the ground, and Clark Gable pulls Spencer Tracy from the wreckage. And then we end up in a quite similar scene to our wing scene with the cradling and the clutching and the saying goodbye to each other. And there's a lot of, like, Spencer Tracy's character is sort of like, I'm happy that this is the road I was on. Like, I got the easy way out because now I don't have to deal with this shit. Basically is his vibe. You're going to have to go home and tell Anne about this. And so they're having this heartfelt, emotional goodbye. Clark Gable says to him, don't die for my sake. And he says, that's all I'd come back for if I could.
And then he dies.
And then he dies. And Clark Gable, he's dealing with this however he's dealing with it. He goes home to Anne, who is in bed, distraught, and says, as we said earlier, why wasn't it you? Which, it's never a good sign when your wife is saying that when you come home.
I wish you had died.
I wish you had died.
No.
And so at first he's like, we'll get through it. It's going to be fine. I've lost, people I know before. It's flying. It's whatever. He goes in to try to get another mission. And his boss is like, you know what, buddy? You're not going to be able to fly again. Like, you love your wife, which is clear to me, and that's going to be a problem. You're not in the headspace to do this. He basically is like, you're done. And because he has lost Spencer Tracy, he is able to be like, you know what? It would be bad if I died. I would feel bad. And Anne would feel bad if I died. Yeah. And he is able to realize this because he doesn't inherently have empathy, but now the situation has happened to him specifically, and he understands that it's no good when your person dies in a plane. So he quits.
Hurts the feelings.
It really hurts the feelings. It does. And he quits, which like never happens in movies like this. Movies that are about some sort of hotshot guy who's pushing the limit or whatever, never is just like, well, if my wife wants me to stop.
Yeah, in Top Gun, the movie just goes, actually, that hotshot pilot was right. And you're like,
yeah, he was right all along. Because you know what? He is the greatest pilot of all time. No one has been or will ever be a better pilot than Maverick, even as a 60-year-old man.
So true. It's so true. Even after he gets his friend killed, he's like, I don't think I need to make any changes.
It didn't work for him to have his friend die because he was just like, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault.
That's not the ship. I guess he didn't love his friend as much as Clark Gable loves Spencer Tracy.
I mean, that's quite obvious. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done what he did.
Yeah.
But I don't have more time to talk about Maverick. We've talked enough about how much Maverick sucks.
We've covered Top Gun before.
But anyway, yes. He learned his lesson, he quits, and when he is at the flight school teaching all of the hot young pilots of tomorrow, he starts doing Spencer Tracy's thing where he puts his gum on one of their planes. It's nice. I cried, though. Spencer Tracy dying fucked me up.
Oh, he's so good at dying. He's so good at acting.
Yeah. This is news. We're breaking hot news here. Spencer Tracy, good actor.
He's good at acting. I mean, we this is not really germane to this episode, but we saw him die the year before in Captain's Courageous, and oh, that broke my heart too.
That was devastating.
Both horrific deaths.
Stop dying so horrifically, Spencer Tracy. You're breaking my heart over here.
One getting crushed by sandbags, and the other, your bottom half getting torn off in a shipwreck.
I mean, that was horrific.
Yeah, and then the cook had to cut him out to sea, and he didn't want the little boy to see that he didn't have a bottom half anymore.
Don't let him see! Anyway,
Spencer
everyone
Tracy,
should watch
y'all.
Captain's Courageous. That's a great movie.
Yeah. Not relevant to this podcast. Anywho.
All right.
Just some Spencer Tracy wrecks.
Yeah, Spencer Tracy rules, and these three are all in love with each other and married.
And that's Test Pilot.
And that's Test Pilot. And thank God we watched it and talked about it and are now able to bring you the knowledge of Test Pilot as we talk about Masters of the Air. Where would we have been had we not seen Test Pilot?
You texted me early in your watch that you were like, oh my God, there's a Test Pilot reference like 30 minutes into the show. And I was like, woof, we are lucky we have done this in this order.
Yes, we are. Because it's a goodie, the Test Pilot reference. It's pretty good reference, yep.
Okay, so that brings us to the main event.
What is this show?
This show, Masters of the Air, is a limited series, 9 episodes, about fighter pilots, mostly the 100th Division?
I have no idea. I mean, aren't they called like the 100th Airborne? I don't know what that is.
Don't know.
We're never going to get better at this, people. Like, it doesn't come up much on this podcast, but on the Oscars one, anytime a war thing happens, we're like, he's captain?
Lieutenant. General?
The only space I have in my mind is this person is an officer. This person is a lower level
Right.
soldier.
And also, like, we understand when someone is higher up than someone else among the officers, but, like, what their actual title
I can understand
is?
rank. I do not know titles. It's not going to happen. It's really not going to happen for me.
So anyway, they're in the 100th.
They're majors. I know that much. They're both majors.
Okay, great. I did not remember that. So they're one of the best fighter pilot groups in the American Army, and we are now over in Britain to provide air support for the war. And guys, there's like a lot of young brunette white dudes in this show.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. A lot of people, you and I are fans of Dunkirk, but a lot of people have a complaint about Dunkirk, that all of the guys are just white guys with brown hair and you can't tell them apart. And in my mind, that works for Dunkirk because that's kind of what he's trying to do.
It does. And it also helps that Dunkirk is sort of like a limited time frame.
Yes. But there's very much that sort of Dunkirk issue in this show where it's very hard to tell the boys apart. But the problem is it's 9 episodes and you kind of need to be able to tell the boys apart.
It also doesn't help that obviously they are pilots. So for portions of the show, they're wearing flight masks, and then it's even harder to tell them apart.
With some people in particular who have very nondescript eye forehead areas. Looking at you, Austin Butler.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys. But anyway, we're going to focus in on the boys in our ship.
Yes.
Buck and Bucky, as we said. John Bucky Egan is sort of like initially in charge of organizing all of the pilots. What's his job? He has a slightly different job. Not Marshall.
Something. I'm thinking Marshall as well. Don't know. He has like a job where he isn't going to fly. They've promoted him to a thing where he's administrative and he is, organizing them somehow. But he doesn't want to do that. No one ever wants to do that. They want battle flight shit. So he's displeased at first.
And so he goes over first and then is followed by the rest of his division, including his best bud, Gale Buck Clevin. Now, early on the show, we learn, of course, how Gale got his nickname. Do you want to tell me about that?
Yes, please. So, and what's interesting is for the show, they kept them Buck and Bucky, I assume, so that you could sort of try to tell their names apart. But in real life, these are based on real people. And I guess we should do the preface of, like, people know on this show we don't do real person fiction. When people take real people and put them into fictional things, I think it becomes fine. Like, this is a fictionalized version of these characters. But point being, they are real people. This really is their story of how they got their names. And they did both go by Bucky, not Buck and Bucky. So they are the Buckies in real life. So the story of this is the two of them met at flight school or whatever when they first joined the military. And John Bucky Egan just like decided he was going to be friends with Gale basically, and he walked up to him and was like, "You look like a guy I know from home named Buck. I'm going to call you Buck." And Gale was like, "How about you don't?" And he was like, I will." And then he just called him Buck so much that everyone else started calling him Buck, and then that became his name for the rest of his life. There's a quote from the real guy from like years after the war. "I never really liked it, but once he named me that was my name forever." And it's like, okay. It's like, call me by your name, but call you by my name situation.
Right. Cool. So anyway, Buck and Bucky, or Buckies, what have you. They're a little bit like odd couple-y, opposites attract kind of boys. Can I just call them by their actor names? Because I actually have a really hard time remembering which one is Buck and which one is Bucky.
Yeah, we could do John and Gale, but if it's easier, let's just do Austin and Callum.
Okay, Callum is John. Austin is Gale.
Yep.
Okay. So Callum is a bit of a heavy drinking, womanizing,
he's like loud and he parties and he dances and he loves sports and he's a guy's guy.
He's a real man's man.
Yeah.
And then Austin is a little bit more reserved. He doesn't drink. He doesn't like sports. He doesn't smoke. He has a steady girl back home, kind of a square. Man after my own heart.
Yep.
And so they say early on in their relationship that they can't believe they're friends. And Austin says, "We are one of life's great mysteries."
Yep. And this is in the opening scene of the show and the opening scene of their friendship. Buck as Bucky, or sorry, I'm now the problem is our notes all say Buck and Bucky, and now I'm in my head gonna have to be switching to Austin.
All right, let's just do Buck and Bucky. It's fine. Bucky is Callum, Buck is Austin.
We'll switch back and forth, I'm sure, given the circumstances. So yeah, this is their like final night together before he's gonna go. Buck says, "Don't you die on me before I get over there." And Bucky says, "Don't count on it." And you'll notice over the course of their friendship, they love to quote themselves to each other, or each other to themselves, or whatever the word for this should be. And so you'll see a lot more of that "don't count on it." They're quoting each other back and forth for the entirety of their friendship. So then Bucky has gone over to the war and he's preparing for Buck's arrival, and he does this like what seems like a really stupid stunt at a bar in order to win a couple of bicycles, and you're like, why is he doing this? And then Buck shows up and he's like, "I won you a bicycle." And Buck's like, "Do I need a bicycle?" And he's like, "Yeah, you gotta have one to get from here to the mess hall," or blah blah, and they're really hard to get and blah blah. He's like so proud that he has gotten him this bicycle. And when he shows up, he says to him, "Did you miss me?" And Austin's character says, "Like a stone in my shoe," which is another line
re-quoted.
that will get re-quoted.
Okay, so as we mentioned, the test pilot reference comes in hot and early. So Bucky drives Buck back to the base or the mess hall or wherever, the barracks. I don't know where they're going. And they're being all sweet and lovey-dovey. And another soldier sees them and he says, "If you ask me, those two have watched Test Pilot a few too many times."
And his friend says to him, "You watched Test Pilot a few too many times." And I think in the context of the show, they're trying to do like, those guys think they're such cool pilots. They probably idolize Test Pilot. But in the context of having seen Test Pilot and knowing what that relationship is like, it could not feel more like a euphemism for like, are those two homos?
A little light in the loafers? A little Test Pilot.
I think that's going to enter my lexicon for people where I'm like, have they watched Test Pilot a few too many times? Question mark. Hilarious.
So
but
funny.
Again, a reference we never would have gotten, so thank God.
Thanks as always to our Oscars podcast. We're so much more culturally literate.
So, towards the end of this episode, the pilot, Buck's gonna go up and fly his first mission. Bucky is quite nervous about it, which I think Buck doesn't really understand because he doesn't know what it's gonna be like to go fly the missions. Spoiler alert, it's real fucked up.
Yeah. And Bucky had gone out on like a mission before to see what it's like. So
he's flown a couple
back
of
to
missions.
His group.
Yeah.
What it's like, except he elected not to tell anyone.
Well, because like, what do you say? I think
it's pretty bad.
The hurdle he ran into was like, I have no way of communicating to you that it's deeply fucked up. Instead, he's just like clearly really nervous about Buck going off. And he is trying to be like, be careful. And also, here, take my lucky deuce, which is his $2 bill with his corners torn off for his 2 missions. And he's like, take my lucky deuce. You got to have it. And he's like, why are you giving me this? Buck doesn't care. He's like, no, just take it on your mission. And he does. And then they go on their mission. It is deeply fucked up. And he comes back and they do have a scene, which we didn't write down here, at the end where Buck is like, why didn't you... He's like traumatized. And it's like, why didn't you tell me what it was like? And he's like, I didn't know what to say. It's like, yeah.
I assume it is a difficult thing to put into words.
But that's why he was so worried about you, bro.
Yeah, that's why he gave you his lucky deuce.
His lucky deuce. You gotta have it.
Everyone should always have their lucky item.
And you will find later on, he later does not take the lucky deuce on a mission.
What is wrong with these superstitious men? Okay, so that's all in episode 1. Brings us into episode 2. And, the show has a lot of missions. I don't think we're going to get too much into the plot, but especially the first few episodes is them, like, going out, things going wrong, them coming back, people are dying.
Half the pilots have been lost. Yeah.
We're losing a lot of our white brunettes who I can't tell apart.
Yeah, guys that we maybe met, maybe had names, hard to tell. They are all dropping like flies through the first few episodes of the show. So we get early on in episode 2, another quoting each other moment where they're having breakfast, and I don't know why he feels the need to say this, but Bucky is expressing his confidence to Buck that everything is going to be okay. And he says to him, if this whole thing ended and there were only 2 pilots left up in the air, it'd be me and it'd be you, Buck.
And Buck says, don't count on it. It's back.
Quoting each other to each other. But also very sweet that if everyone died, it would just be us at the end of time.
Okay. Later in this episode, they go out to a bar. Carousing, and they meet some British pilots. And the British pilots and American pilots hate each other.
They do not get along.
I
know you've heard we're allies, but
we're not friends. So there's a bit of a spat, a verbal spat initially between the British and the Americans, and Buck and Bucky are sitting next to each other. And they're sort of affectionately touching. At one point, Bucky grabs Buck's chin. It's very cute.
It's real cute. You'll find that Bucky is when he gets a little tipsy, he's fairly physically affectionate. So there's a lot of grabbing. But yeah, he's like talking up Buck and how much he likes Buck, and he brings every conversation back to him. They start talking about sports, and he's like, but Buck doesn't even like sports. And you're like,
And the British
okay.
are like, okay.
Okay. And so then, they're talking about their nicknames, and the British are like, did you guys run out of nicknames over there? You have the same nickname?
Which, like, great question.
Yeah. Well, and then they're like, we're not short on nicknames, we're just short on pilots, and things get very serious all of a sudden. And the British guys are like, they basically are like disgusted by them and say something about their heavy petting as a joke about them. And meanwhile, the Americans are like, I don't even know what's heavy petting. I've never heard of such a thing.
Yep.
And it ends up culminating in they challenge each other to fisticuffs, and
of course
Barry Keoghan's character has a fist fight with one of the British guys as Buck and Bucky hang all over each other and talk about how much they like pugilism. Boys. And then their stuff happens. They're still hanging out on base. There's an air raid, and they all end up having to sit around in like a bunker or something. And Bucky's, again, early on in the show, he's very much the positive optimist guy. He's trying to encourage Buck and saying to him, we'll get through this. And Buck says the gambler. And Bucky says, well, if I'm going to bet on anything, I'm going to bet on us, Buck.
Oh,
Sweetie pie. Then they have this conversation about how Buck is like, well, that sounds like my dad, who we learn in this conversation was a drunk and a gambler, and it seems like he had a pretty rough childhood. And so he says all of this, and then Bucky, instead of responding to anything about himself, is like, Buck, this is why you don't like sports. It's like, yeah, definitely. Your dad gambled all of your life savings away on sports when you were a child. It's all coming
your dad
together.
was an inveterate drunk and a gambler. You might not drink and gamble and like sports yourself. Sure. It all makes sense.
Yeah, it's all coming together. But then I find this even more interesting, how drawn to Bucky Buck is when he has to see so much of his father in him. And you're like, this is a really interesting relationship.
Well, ain't that the way?
Yeah. It truly is.
Ain't that the way?
Ain't that the way? So anyway, that's episode 102.
Now we're in episode 103.
Another mission.
Wow.
Somehow Bucky, who has been grounded on this new job, gets like a made-up role that means he will now get to fly. He's the reserve command pilot or something, which is made up to be like, just in case the command pilot goes out, now you're in charge.
Yeah.
And so this means he's going to get to go up on the mission. And they're mostly separated throughout this episode, but Bucky spends like 4 times in this episode. He's like, how's Buck doing? Anybody seen Buck's plane? Is Buck's plane still with us? He's like, at one point, Buck's plane is taking fire, and he's like, screw it, I'm going down to work the gun. You're like, okay, I see where all of your concerns are. But that whole episode basically is this battle, and then they're flying to Africa, is their final route at the end of the mission, and they land there, and like most of the planes have gone down. It's dark times.
They're constantly losing so many people.
Well, I found out from their press tour that like 77% of these planes got shot down. These people either got shot down and killed or ended up in POW camps, but like,
oh boy,
this was a really, really dangerous job.
It's tough to be a pilot.
Yeah. So they're in Africa, still in episode 3. Bucky is the positive one, and he's saying to Buck, we're gonna make it through. Don't you stop believing that. And
sure, Bucky.
He's trying to stay so positive. But things, I have a feeling, might be taking an emotional turn for Bucky quite soon.
You're saying they're not just going to continue to do a mission per episode and then come back?
I mean, they could, but that would be an interesting show setup.
Okay.
Instead, I think some things might be about to happen in episode 104.
Okay, so Bucky has gone on leave. He meets a lady. She's a war widow.
Buck makes him go on leave because he feels like Bucky's getting like twitchy. So he's like, I think you should probably take a break.
Mm-hmm. And they connect, and she tells him how hard it is to be a war widow.
Yeah, I mean, was married to a pilot, and her story is like, my pilot went down in Germany or whatever, so he's either dead and in a potato field somewhere, or he's a prisoner, and I have no idea. And she talks him through like all of the various what it's like to have had this happen to her. And it's like, pay attention to all of these things because they're about to happen to you, Bucky Egan.
Foreshadowing. So Buck goes on a mission, and oh no, he gets shot down in enemy
Ah!
territory.
Ah!
Yikes.
Oh no!
And back on base, the first question is, who's going to tell Egan?
Oh no! No one wants to communicate that his best guy got shot down.
Yeah. And Bucky ends up seeing in the paper that a number of bombers were lost in the mission, and he immediately ducks into a phone booth and calls in an encoded conversation about the quarterback of the
Unbreakable
football
code.
team. What happened to the game? Oh, it didn't go well? Did the quarterback go down? Yeah, the quarterback went down.
I think it's
Tell the
really
coach
it's a baseball metaphor because he says he went down swinging.
Oh, I thought it was the quarterback.
I mean, I don't. Did they say something specific about a quarterback?
I think they did.
Well, I mean, they're mixing their metaphors then because all of this is baseball.
Maybe it was like because I don't know who in baseball would go down. But anyway, and then he was like, "Tell the coach I'm going into the game." Is how he ends the phone call.
But yeah, he's like, was Buck in the lineup, which is a baseball metaphor? Did he have a good game? He went down swinging, John, which is another baseball metaphor.
I'm wrong.
They talk a lot about baseball more than they talk about football which
makes sense.
Yeah,
it's
the times.
The 40s.
Yeah.
Any which way, he ends the conversation with "Tell the coach I'm going in the game."
I'm going in the game. And he comes home and he's like, I'm about to kill so many Germans. That's my plan now.
So,
So he's home. It's 1:05. Everyone on the base does not know how to handle him. He's like, they're walking around like, oh no, we don't want to set off Bucky. He's all upset about Buck. I don't want to hurt his feelings. So he has several conversations that are like, you doing okay, bud? The mechanic for their planes, this lovely little guy named Kenny, finds Bucky just like drunk in a plane one morning, and he's like, "Are you all right? We're all gonna miss Major Clevin, sir." And he just ignores him and is like, "Weather report." And Kenny's like, "Let me drive you back to base." And he says, "Don't worry, Kenny, I don't even feel it." And it's like, what don't you feel, John? Are you feeling your feelings, buddy?
Oh, so you shouldn't be driving.
No. Then they get news that they're all going to go out and fly another mission. And I think in real time, like, the planes went down, and I believe the revenge mission they fly is 2 days later. So it's not like they don't have replenishment of planes, replenishment of men. They're like, we're going right back out with what we've got. And the men are all like, this is very troubling. We don't have enough planes. And also they find out that their mission is bombing basically really near a city center, much closer than they have done so far. And so people are having feelings about
Ethical
dilemmas. So when they announce that there's going to be, well, they haven't announced there's going to be a mission. It's like the night before they're going to announce it, but everyone knows there's going to be. Everyone's looking at him in the bar, and he says, "No use wondering, gentlemen. You can all do the math as to why I came back early." And then, yes, they find out their mission. And everyone's having ethical dilemmas, except for Bucky, who previously had some sort of scruples, and now is like, if Bucky's down, everything's on the table.
Burn the whole country to the ground.
Yeah. He is like, I'm fine with it. It's the mission. It's what we do. What, are we going to wait around until everybody that we ever shared a bunk with is either dead or missing? And someone says to him, none of the people we're going to bomb today shot down Buck. I love that they all keep calling him out on this.
Yeah.
They're like, we know exactly why you're being weird.
Yeah, it's not the number of men we lost. It's the specific man we lost.
Just that one guy. And then finally, they're going to go off on their mission. He's going to get to fly, which he doesn't usually get to do. And as they're like driving off to the planes, he's like, stop the car. He sees a guy. He runs over to him and he trades jackets with him. And this is unimportant to the ship, but I will say the jacket that he was wearing up until this point is a fire jacket.
It's really good.
I love all bomber jackets, but this looks like one I've never seen before. It's like white sheepskin on the outside instead of dark with a sheepskin collar. And it has like different color tan patches. It just looks sick. It's an awesome jacket. But anyway, he trades his jacket with a guy. He gets in the cockpit of the plane, and whoever he's flying with says to him, trade out your sheepskin, Major. And he says, Buck always hated that jacket.
Yeah. God forbid he rescue Buck, and Buck's first thought is like, ugh, that jacket.
You want to be looking good for your man.
Yeah. Okay. That brings us to episode 106. Not related directly to the Buck and Bucky relationship, but worth mentioning. There is a second test pilot reference
They
Everyone's watching
love
Test Pilot.
Test Pilot. Crosby, one
Everyone
of the
saw it.
characters, is doing an impression from Test Pilot into a mirror, and the woman that he's talking to catches him doing it and is like, is that Tracy or Gable? And he says Tracy, and she says, I would have thought Gable, because to be fair, it's a bad impression.
It's very bad.
But it is a Tracy line.
Yes.
Because when he did it, I was like, he must be doing Test Pilot, but I didn't remember the line. So I looked it up, and he's delivering it in such a different way than Tracy delivered it that it made it like unrecognizable to me in terms of his intonation. But
Well, he's doing a good job of doing a bad impression to confuse the person.
really great work, Anthony Boyle.
But yeah, so just another little Test Pilot seed.
Yep.
So Bucky has also gone down, captured. Now he gets interrogated by a Nazi. And it's fascinating because every time we see anyone get interrogated by the Nazis, they know so much about them. Their intelligence is very good.
Yeah, their research teams are awesome because they know everything
Like,
about all of guys.
Not to give any kudos to Nazis, but like, whoa. Their research department was doing a great job because he knows everything about
Including about like secret feelings
Yep.
for each other.
So he wants to apply pressure to Bucky, and the way he does it is by bringing up Buck.
Yeah, he just won't stop talking about him. He's like, I want to ask you some questions about Gale Clevin. And he's like, huh? Because, you know, when pilots or whoever goes down, they're not supposed to say anything other than their name, rank, and serial number when they're getting interrogated. So he's trying to stay on message, and the guy just keeps being like, how about Gale Clevin? And he's like, what?
He was your friend, wasn't he? Seems we are shooting down all the good pilots.
Yeah. And they keep, like, everyone keeps making it seem like he's dead to say he was your friend when they have him in a POW camp. They know he's alive.
Oh, they know.
Lying Nazi bastards.
They're just applying pressure, needling, seeing if they can get something out of him. But, you know, they end up sending him to they send him to a POW camp. This is probably my favorite moment.
It's a great
in the ship.
moment. I mean, it's like everything about it's really good. So Bucky walks into this POW camp.
Yeah, they're being marched. A group is being marched into the POW camp, and the other soldiers are lining, you know, beyond the fence.
Yes, and so because everyone wants to catch a glimpse of like if anyone they know has arrived or if they can get news from home or whatever. And so as Bucky's walking in, he sees a bunch of guys from his from the mission that he was on where they went down, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're alive! You're alive! How's it going?" And the first question, of course, out of Bucky's mouth is, "Have any of you seen Buck?" And before they can answer, from across the way, Bucky hears Buck go, "John Egan, on your two," or whatever like that, some clock metaphor shit. And he turns and he looks at him, and in like slow motion with swelling music, the two of them make eye contact and share these smiles. And Buck says to him, "What took you so long?" And Bucky's just like so happy. The happiest anyone has ever been to arrive at a POW camp.
Truly. Also, it's funny to think about that scene because they're all in a bunk together, right? So did Buck specifically not stand next to his friends so that he could have this moment?
Sure, maybe.
I'd like to think they heard the commotion. He's like,
And he was like, no, guys, it's going to be awesome. I'm going to be over there.
yeah. You guys call out to him first if you see him. And then I'll be over here.
Yeah. According to the people, the guys said this was really what happened. Buck's real line to him when they saw each other was, "What took you so long?" So,
I mean, it's great.
it's a cute friendship.
It's really good. Really romantic moment. Loved
Very.
it. Okay.
Well, and the way they shoot it. And then, like, Bucky, turns the whole 180 degrees smiling after him as he walks by. They're so happy.
Yeah.
Happy.
Okay.
All right. 107. We're in a camp. What can one get up to in a POW camp?
All kinds of shenanigans. Here's the thing that we've learned. We also watched this movie called Grand Illusion recently, where they all decide that the only thing to do when you're in the camp is to try to break out of the camp. Because, like, what else are you going to try to accomplish?
We got to figure out how to get out. At first, they have to figure out how to get news from outside the camp because they had a radio, and the radio gets taken. And
They're going to
yes.
build a new radio.
Gale is like, I know how to build a radio. I'll need all of these parts. And for some reason, even though Gale has been in the camp for much longer than John and knows all of the people already, he's like, John, can you get me all these parts that I need? I'm going to need copper wire and da-da-da and this and that. And John is like, yeah, let me see what I can do. First he calls him my little Kriegi Marconi.
Oh.
And then he's like, yeah, let me see what I can do. And then there's like a little montage.
So my hypothesis about this situation is Buck knows he needs to give Bucky a task or he's going to lose it.
But it's very funny to me because it's one thing to be like, we need parts. You get these, I'll get these. We'll meet back and make a radio. But instead, no. He's like, here are the parts. Get me the parts and I will make it. And then the final scene of the montage is John stripping copper wire out of a lamp directly in front of Gale, who's just sitting at the table watching him do it. Which is clearly something he could do. And then he hands him the copper wire and he says to Gale, there you go. Is it good? And Gale says, it's great.
It's like, very like what you would do with a child to occupy their time, is to get them to do menial tasks and then be like, oh, you did such a good job.
You did so, I never could have done this myself. Thank you for finding all these supplies.
Because kids want to help.
It's so funny. So he's trying to keep him occupied.
Yeah. And to make him feel like he's a good boy.
You got to make him feel like he's a good boy. Very important. So things go along. First he's occupied, but then it gets boring because they end up in this camp for like 18 months. Yeah.
And you can only build a radio once, really.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one more time if it gets confiscated, but it's probably not going to be a weekly occurrence. So yeah, John is starting to get more and more agitated, weird. He's not enjoying being here. He doesn't like being cooped up. He also, they finally start to get letters in from the outside, and John gets no letters. Aww. No one loves John, apparently. But
that's
Buck,
sad.
It's fucking awful. But Buck, who we said before has a steady girl back home, Marge, he gets a letter from Marge, and there's, first of all, a hilarious scene where he's reading her letter and like smelling it because the women would put their perfume on the letters. And all of the guys at the camp are like, who's that from? And he says, Marge. And immediately John goes, Marge. Just like, buddy, rein it in. But anyway, in the letter, Buck has asked Marge to marry him when he gets home. And she has accepted his proposal. And so there's a scene at night where the two Buckys are talking, and Buck says to Bucky that this is what has happened. And he says, I was even thinking that maybe you could be my best man. And he says, I will be your best man. And so now it's like, all right, hope you guys get home to have this wedding. It's important that you live. And then things are just getting worse and worse emotionally for John. There's a point where the British people in their camp have dug several tunnels and made a great escape and like very dramatically gotten away and then immediately gotten killed. Yeah, they get caught and then almost all of them get executed. But Buck, who even John all along has been like, we should be planning our escape, and Buck's like, well, we got to be careful because I plan to survive. Now Buck is like, hey, you were right. We probably should have made a break for it when the guards were chasing after the British people. And now Bucky has turned around and he says, like, well, what do I have to even get home for? Nobody writes me letters. I never set that up right. And you're like, oh, bud, why is no one writing him letters? And so they have this conversation, and Buck says to him, it's just this place talking. You're tired.
I am tired.
You'll have plenty of time for that when you get out. You'll set it up right next time.
They're only going to know this me, not the old me. Me before I got here. That's if we even get out.
We'll get out, and this you will be the one worth knowing.
That's so sweet.
That's a lovely thing to say to a person.
He's gotten so despondent.
It's amazing how... I don't know how Buck is able to do it. Like, I think he puts his energy into commanding his men or whatever, because he's coming up with missions for everybody and leading, which is, they're not really following John. John's just sitting around. But he holds it together so well through the camp in a way that he wasn't when they were flying the missions. And John was the one having to be like, it's going to be fine. And now Buck is like, we're going to make it.
Yeah, well, he's got to step up because his optimist guy is so sad.
It's important to emotionally hold up your bros when they're feeling down.
It's true.
Yeah.
And
this
this
you will
you
be
will
the
be
one
the
worth
one
knowing.
worth knowing. That's
I
so
mean, is that
nice.
who doesn't want someone to say that to them? That's so nice.
It's really nice.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
lovely.
Episode 8.
Bucky continues to spiral. He's like out in the middle of the camp by himself, reenacting a baseball game alone, aloud. And Buck walks up to him and is like, "How you doing? Okay?" And he's like, "I'm great. Why wouldn't I be great? I feel fine." And you're like, "Oh no."
No.
Things are going really wrong. And Buck, meanwhile, as we said, is commanding his men. He's got them doing missions. They're all pulling big tree stumps out of the ground because they need the wood for the upcoming winter.
Mm-hmm.
And John is like not feeling it because it doesn't feel like these missions have a lot of point. And he comes over and he's just bothering them while they're digging up the stump. And he
And he's
gets
like, "You guys want to
it.
play baseball?"
Yeah, let's play baseball. Why don't we play baseball instead? And some other random guy is like, "Hey, if you're not going to help, get out of here." And Bucky gives him a little shove, and then Buck jumps in and shoves him to the ground. Physical altercation between the boys. And he says, "What the hell's wrong with you? If you ain't going to help, stay out of the way."
Yeah. And then Bucky says, "You're the new king of the camp and I'm just in the way." Okay, King Clevin says no baseball, just work, work, work. That's all he wants to do.
And then, of course, immediately Buck feels bad about shoving him, so he goes over and he's like, "I'm sorry." And he tries to help him up, and John's still not having it, and so he pulls him down, and the two of them have the funniest fight, where they're basically just pulling on each other's ankles. I don't really know.
They're kind of locked their legs around each other and are just kind of like pulling on their legs. It's very strange.
Yep.
In the mud.
Yep. And then Buck punches Bucky in the face, which sort of ends it. And then all of a sudden, we learn that France has been invaded by the Allies, and they are going to need to get in shape because the Germans are probably going to have to march them out of this camp because, well, okay, so there are different things that could happen. They're like, stuff's about to happen because the lines are moving. So either they're going to try to execute us all, or they're going to try to march us out of the camp, or I don't remember if there's a third option.
Yeah, but either way, we got to be in better shape.
We need to be prepared for whatever the eventuality is. So the guys need to get back in shape. And so as soon as it's like, okay, we have an actual mission, Bucky's fine again. Bucky's like, "Great, I can lead a mission. We'll go back to the tree stump thing because we can't work out where they'll see us working out, but that'll put us into shape, and we'll do this and we'll do that." And all of a sudden, he's fine. It's amazing what having a task will do for a person.
Some people need their energy directed. Some people cannot self-regulate, which we know because he's got a gambling problem and a drinking problem.
Exactly. I think there is this interesting dynamic to the two of them where clearly he can't self-regulate. He's like self-medicating with any manner of things that he now is unable to do in the camp, by the way. Part of it is probably that he can't drink and there's not any gambling to be done. But so there's that, and this is how he's coping with the war. And I have to imagine he's fascinated by Buck, where it's like, how are you coping with the war? You have no vices. Like, how are you getting through this? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, they're a mystery.
It's really tough. It's really tough for people who can self-regulate to understand people who can't.
Yeah. Okay, episode 9. For the final episode, we're marching. It's cold.
It's so cold.
It's really, really cold. They're being marched through the German countryside in the middle of the winter. It's freezing. They're making them march at night. And there are Allied pilots flying missions now because we're this much further into the war that we've given up on the daylight raids thing. And they're flying missions and just like shooting at them in the middle of the night. And they're like, "We cannot have our own guys shoot us as we're being marched out of a prison camp. That's no way to go down." So they start like negotiating with the Germans, which is very interesting about when they will march and what they will do. But throughout all of this, it's starting to feel like things are coming to a head. The boys are saying to each other on their march, "You're not thinking of running, are you? You're not thinking of running, are you?" So they're like plotting out what's going to happen. They're being moved eventually by train and thinking like, we're coming to a head. So that might mean our eventual deaths. Let's start like getting it out there, how we are feeling about each other. And they're asking each other on the train if they would have done anything differently. And Bucky says, no, looking back, probably I wouldn't have done anything differently. And Buck says, when he's asked, I wasn't planning on getting shot down. You know, I really did believe that if there was only 2 B-17s left, it'd be you and me flying them.
Call back.
They love a callback. Callbacks, callbacks, callbacks. But now we have what is your favorite moment.
Indeed. Indeed. Can you read the...
So yeah, Buck says to Bucky, as they're thinking about all of this, last few years would have been a lot rougher without you, John.
Now here's a moment. Here's a moment for Bucky to say something meaningful back to him. And what he says is, same.
Sometimes it's hard to put your emotions into words.
Okay, Han Solo.
Hey, his actions have spoken for how he feels about him.
Well, I'm just saying that Bucky said a lot of sweet things to him. He said the thing about how, you know, the people want to know this you, and like the last few years have been harder, and it's like, come on, give him something back, John.
Bucky's the one who said the thing about how if everyone else was dead, they would be the last 2 flying the planes.
Yeah, but that was years ago.
That was years ago. What have you said to me lately? Okay. So anyway, things do come to a head. There's some fighting with the German captives or captors, and there's fighting. Bucky's like about to get himself killed by some Germans because they said something that offended him or whatever. So he's fighting with them, and Buck is like, I can't have this happen. So he pulls him aside and he's like, I'm in. We're gonna escape. He's got to give him a task, see? Mm-hmm. So he's like, we're going to do the escape mission. It's happening. So them and a couple of other guys are like, okay, great. Let's do it. Here's our plan. We'll find this alley. And when they're distracted, you'll go, then you'll go, then you'll go. And so the first 2 guys go and they get over this wall to escape. Then it's Buck's turn. And he starts going to get over the wall to escape. And then they see him trying to escape. And Bucky like confronts the German soldier who has a gun. He just runs up to the guy, grabs the gun.
Yeah.
Just bold. And he yells to Buck, like, Buck, go.
Get out of here.
Get out of here. And he does. He runs and he jumps over the wall, which, you know, he felt guilty about that for the rest of his life. So he leaves Bucky there with the Germans. Thank God the guy who was like their union rep of the POWs.
Yeah, we don't know who this guy is.
I don't know,
cool.
But he's awesome. I love him. He steps in and he's like, you will not kill that man. I need him. He's part of my leadership team. And if you
kill him, we will all riot.
We will all riot. Because the dynamics have shifted, because it's one thing to have fewer guards keeping people in a prison. It's very different to have fewer guards marching lots of people through open space. Like if they want to revolt or run or whatever, there's not a lot that the people could do about this. So they do. They don't kill him. Thank God. I can only imagine that as Buck was running the whole time, he thought, Bucky's dead, Bucky's dead, Bucky's dead. Like, that's so scary. So he's fine. He stays, but they continue to get shipped from POW camp to POW camp, getting further and further from wherever the edge of German territory was for the rest of this war. Buck does make it home, even though he's traumatized because one of the guys he's with gets shot by a child. It's very All Quiet on the Western Front, like, you know, really dark. Things always get so tragic and dark right as the war is about to end, and like every death is a tragedy, and you're like, this was preventable. None of you needed to die. The war was just about to end. And
did he get shot by a child or bayoneted? He got
bayoneted by a child, and then Buck almost shoots a child because he fights with him and grabs his gun and then is pointing his gun at a kid, and it's like one of those really dark war moments where you're like, do you have this inside of you? And he does not, of course. He sends the kid away. But yeah, that's fucked up. So anyway, he makes it home and
he gets bayoneted while he's peeing.
It's fucked up, man. That sort of thing just shouldn't happen. What a useless waste of life.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, so he makes it home, and all of his stuff is still there.
Okay, so here's the thing. When a soldier goes down, either MIA or killed or whatever, they all have a trunk that has all their stuff in it, and usually they ship the trunk home to the family, because what else are they going to do with the trunk? Why would they keep it? The family should have it. And meanwhile...
And it's important, too, right, that we've learned, and this makes sense, once you're a POW, if you make it back, they don't send you back out.
No, they send you home.
they send you home. So it's not like you're going to be there and your stuff's not going to be there and then you're going to keep
Yeah.
working.
What about my books? So anyway, he gets home. His trunk is still there. I believe I mentioned this. 18 months later, his trunk is still there. And they say to Buck that they kept his trunk because, quote, Egan wouldn't let us ship it back to your folks. Kept saying, I expect him back, and my buddy's just MIA. And I'll remind you that there were 2 days between Buck going down on his mission and Bucky leaving on the mission that he went down on. So he threw up such a stink in his 2 days that somehow they have kept his trunk the entire time.
Presumably while receiving letters from his family and his fiance being like, can we have his stuff back? And they're like, no.
No, sorry. His friend said that we couldn't send it to you.
Okay.
So, amazing. Buck is going through the things in the trunk. Nice to see them again after all this time. He picks up a picture of Marge. He looks at it. He sets it down. He sees in the trunk the Lucky Deuce. And this is where I have the moment of like, first of
Bucky.
all, it's really nice that he sees the Lucky Deuce. He remembers Bucky. He pockets the Lucky Deuce, which is very sweet. Mm-hmm. But it just makes you think, like, first of all, why didn't you take the Lucky Deuce on your mission? He gave it to you for a reason. It was lucky. And second of all, when Bucky came back and presumably packed all of his stuff up into the trunk that he wouldn't let them send, he saw the Lucky Deuce there, could have taken it himself, and also didn't. He was planning to go down on his mission.
Take your lucky item on the flight. Do your ritual.
Yeah. It's very important. It's very important to do your ritual.
Come on, guys.
So yeah, the Lucky Deuce. And then the boys who are there with Buck ask, like, so Bucky didn't make the escape with ya, huh? And he says, Bucky had to stay behind with the men.
He's okay, though, right?
He's okay, though, right? And he says, when did you ever know him not to be okay? Absolute lies.
Yeah.
He was not okay through any of that POW time. But it's interesting. Like, I love thinking about what is going on with Buck having lived, like, escaped and left Bucky there, and what does that feel like? And saying Bucky had to stay with the men, and it's like, did he have to stay? Why didn't you have to stay with the men? What happened there?
Come back. But you ran. Oh, tough stuff. It's tough. You're making split decisions.
Well, and he's gonna feel guilty about it forever, but there's no way that Bucky thinks that was the wrong thing to do. Bucky's delighted that he sent him out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I hope they talked about it after the war.
Yep. So, as we said, you don't go back out on like combat missions.
But the war's over, basically, by the time he gets home.
And they do start flying humanitarian missions to drop food because people in the Netherlands are having food shortages. So they're dropping food on them, which is great. Very nice.
And so he's coming back from one of these humanitarian missions. He's about to land back at his base. The tower calls in because they always say, like, here's, I don't know what it is. They give them the instructions for landing. I don't know, pilot things. And so someone is giving him...
We don't know military things. We don't know pilot things. We don't know rank. We are following the story.
That's not what we're here for, and you know it. So anyway, the guy calls him from the tower. He thinks, that voice sounds a little bit familiar. And he asks him to repeat the instructions. And then we find out it's Bucky. And he says... You heard me the first goddamn time, Gale.
And Buck says, well, I'll be damned.
He's so happy. And then he turns to Rosie, who's with him, who we haven't even mentioned, and who hardly knows the two of them, but he's equally delighted for some reason.
Of course.
And then, he lands the plane. He's taxiing. That's a word I know. And Bucky drives up in his Jeep alongside the plane, and they're smiling at each other again and seeing each other. And one last time, we get a quote. Buck says to him, look who it is, the stone in my shoe.
Call back.
And then the two of them see each other in person for the first time after escaping the POW camp.
Oh my God.
And thinking that the other one was dead.
Either could have been dead.
I'm sure they were sure the other one was dead. Although hopefully they were thinking like, he's fine. Because that's how you make it through.
You would have the concern in your heart.
Exactly.
And so you're thinking, they're going to run to each other. It's going to be a Fin-Po moment.
There's going to be slow motion running across the tarmac at each other. What actually happens?
a very heterosexual, firm handshake. Manly, straight, respectful,
Respectful. And very
firm
heterosexual.
handshake.
Uh-huh. 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 That feels right. That feels
Yeah.
normal.
That feels satisfying.
It's both narratively satisfying and also true to character, because we certainly haven't seen these boys hanging all over each other in earlier episodes of
They
the
never
show.
have touched each other affectionately before. And when it happens, you go, ah, yes, that feels good.
Yes, accurate. Very satisfying handshake.
Mm-hmm.
So funny. So anyway, the ceasefire is called. The war in Europe is over. VE Day, everybody. And
Yeah.
everyone on the base is celebrating. But you won't find Buck and Bucky with everyone celebrating, because the two of them are sitting off alone together, sharing Bucky's flask. And Buck takes a drink from the flask, which feels like kind of a big thing.
Yeah.
And the war is over, and it's nice. And then we gotta fly back to America. Let's all go home. And Buck and Bucky are gonna fly the plane together, which I realized in the moment had not happened over the course of the show. Two best friend pilots never flew a mission together. And now they're gonna get to sit in the cockpit side by side and fly their plane back to America. And that's nice.
Yeah, that is nice.
They lived.
That is nice. That's good. I like it. A lot of people did not.
A lot of people, most of them didn't live.
Yikes.
These guys lived, though. And they stayed friends, which was nice.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will ruin everyone else's day by telling you they give you the postscript of what happened to them all. And John Egan died at 45.
That's too bad.
Too young.
Although some of those Tuskegee airmen lived a very long time.
Hell yeah.
Which is great to see.
Yeah. I mean, Buck lived quite a while, but Bucky died and Buck's wife Marge died very young. So,
Poor Buck.
sad times for Buck.
But here's the thing. He doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke. That's going to give you a little
Clean
bit longer
living.
lifespan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is the Buck and Bucky arc of Masters of the Air. Now, I will preface before we get into what the creators say and do. As we mentioned, these characters are based on real people. They have been fictionalized, but they are based on real people. And you don't really see a lot of World War II media based on real people where people are being like, but what if they were making out? You know, like, I think that we got to set the tone for how they're going to speak about the two of them, because...
Right. And also the types of questions that are going to be asked.
Absolutely. So, we do have a quote about their relationship from John Orloff, who was the writer of basically all the episodes. Some of them are co-written, but the showrunner of the show. And this question actually is about Harry Crosby, who's a character we didn't really mention. That's the Anthony Boyle character who does the test pilot reference. Or impression.
Second test pilot reference.
I think he does the first test pilot reference and the second test pilot impression. He's a big test pilot fan.
Dude loves test pilot.
But anyway, they're asking John about the structure of the show because that character Crosby becomes kind of the narrator in parts because he ends up writing a memoir about his time in the war. And so they're like, Crosby becoming more the main character, etc. And even in the course of that question, this is what John Orloff ends up talking about. So he says, Crosby's the only guy there the whole time. And by chance, he really was one of Rosie's best friends, so it all worked. Crosby suddenly became sort of the heart, the foundation maybe of the show, and everything else kind of built on top of him, even though you don't meet him first or see him last, because emotionally, it's a love story between Buck and Bucky. They're separated, they get back together, separated, they get back together, all of which is true, by the way. Every one of their separations and reunions is true, pretty much how we show it, with one exception at the very end. Egan doesn't come back to Thorpe Abbott's directly, that's their base. They don't meet up again until America, and we just couldn't do it that way for budget reasons. Anyway, that's sort of the emotional through line, that platonic love story, and then Crosby is this anchor of the larger story at hand. This answers so many questions for me, this quote, because we didn't talk about this, but Buck and Bucky aside, lovely friendship relationship they have, there are narrative and structural issues throughout this show that are glaringly troubling for me. The way they
Baffling.
do the characters. Baffling. And hearing John Orloff say, everything that we showed was real except for their reunion answers multiple questions. One, he was very faithful to the events of the real life history, which is fine for a documentary, but not good for a narrative series. And it also explains why they had a firm handshake for their reunion, because that's the one moment from the show that is not real. He had to make it up.
But also, like, if you could invent anything, why would you be like, you know what's going to be satisfying here? A firm handshake.
Yeah.
Put her there, pal.
Every, like, romantic, sweet moment of their friendship with them quoting each other and what they said, and they even cut stuff out. Like, we talked about, the two of them shared a bunk in the POW camp because it was winter and everyone had to share bunks. And, like, that's a lovely little intimacy that they shared that they didn't put in the show. So all of that stuff is real, and you're like, yeah, I'm buying this arc of their friendship. And then the one time he has to come up with something on his own, he's like, and then they shook each other's hands. You're like, dude, I don't know if you're trying to be respectful, but they definitely would have hugged.
I think so. I just think so. Just as a human being with human emotions, if my best friend who I'd been through all of this with, and the war was over, so you have the full cathartic release.
Yes.
Like, no one else is going to have to die in this thing. And oh my God, I thought you were dead, and you're not dead.
Yes. Firm handshake.
Here's the thing. Even if it's just a firm handshake, maybe put your other hand on the shoulder.
Just... yeah, you don't even get that.
You know?
So funny.
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. But it is quite clear in the way that they've told the story that they view their relationship as the heart of the show. They are the main through line for all of the things that are happening. And so for him to say, yes, it is about the platonic love story of Buck and Bucky. They're separated, they're together, they're separated, they're together. It very much is that. That part, he is correct. That is the emotional through line of the show.
Yes.
He delivered on that.
True. Could have structured some other stuff around it a bit better, but, you know, whatever.
All of the other issues, because that is not necessarily the purview of our podcast.
True.
But there were issues. And we will leave it at that.
Okay. So that's what the creator says. We have some quotes from our two main guys, Callum Turner and Austin Butler. First up is Callum, and he just is sort of reiterating what we just heard from John Orloff. So he says to Awards Daily.
They asked him, when I talked to John Orloff, he said that a large part of the show is a love story between Buck, played by Austin Butler, and Bucky, played by you. Do you agree with that assessment? And then this is his answer.
And then Callum says, yeah, absolutely. It's a buddy epic. It flows into the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid style. Interesting.
Whenever people reference them, I'm like, yay.
Interesting.
I think we're all on the same page.
It becomes a road movie in a sense if you want to look at it like that. It really does. I think the relationship between them is so pivotal, so vital, because it's representing a greater thing. It's really representing that together we are stronger. Together we can do things that are greater than by just doing it ourselves. And what I loved about Buck and Bucky is that they both joined up before Pearl Harbor. They both wanted to fight the good fight in a way that they knew how. They are both the best pilots in the business at that moment. They kind of just follow each other around, and they build this trust, and they know that they're going to be integral to winning the war in some way. That bonds them for life. They go through something like a 6-month training process, and then they go off to war and fight it together. They're together at the roots. And then they have this yin and yang style of relationship that is almost the branches of their personalities, where they can just be free and funny or not, and they can be themselves. I think that's one of the most beautiful things any friendship can give, the opportunity or the space to be yourself. Callum Turner's a talker.
He is such a talker, but also the way that he talks about this is so, like, I don't know what it's reminding me of, but it's reminding me of various people talking about the things. Like, if you could free to just be together and talk or not talk.
It's a little J.J. Abrams. It's not as offensive.
But I don't think he's trying to do the J.J. Abrams
No,
thing.
he's not, but the amount of words.
The amount of words is J.J. Abrams-esque. But what he's trying to, the like, you know, the tone in which he speaks about them reminds me of someone with where they can just be free and funny or not, like and share and talk or just be silent. That's really reminding me of something else. It's very funny.
So many words.
Yeah, because we're only halfway done. There's another half of the quote.
Yes, he continues. Austin and I really focused on that. That was the key for us. We're not directing the episodes, so what we're in control of is the relationship and what it means to the show. We spent a lot of time together. We were pretty inseparable for the first 3 months or so, building that relationship, opening up to each other, sharing who we are to each other, and building that trust in the way that Buck and Bucky did. And then as actors, we both respect each other a lot and would allow each other to explore things in the show and in our performances because we created that safe space. At times, I'd just be trying to make Austin laugh because that's what I think Bucky would have been doing to Buck. And if I wasn't making him laugh live in the scene, I'd go again, or I'd do something that really did make him laugh. And I'd go, okay, well, I'll try something else, especially that singing sequence. That was a real just make Buck laugh moment. I think that's the heartbeat of anything. When you watch something, it's all about the relationships that are developing on screen.
That's true. That is what it's all about. We didn't even talk about the singing thing. That is a cute moment for the two of them. There's a scene where they're at their little bar and there's live music playing. I think it's Blue Skies. Mm-hmm. And it's just instrumental. And Buck and Bucky are sitting together on the side. And Bucky is like vibrating with energy, as he always is. And is like, you know what? I think that this is missing something. And Buck's like, what? And he's like, vocals. And he's like, no. And Bucky is like, no, it is. And he gets up and he goes and sings badly. And everyone else in the room is like, why is this happening? And Buck is like smiling indulgently at him, like, isn't he adorable? He's such a bad singer. So yes, thanks for all of that, Callum. Lot to say. Mm-hmm. We also have a quote that I saw people talking about all over Tumblr, which is fascinating and is the closest we get to anybody encouraging some sort of shipping of these two characters. And the source for it, unknown. A lot of people are like, did you just make this up, Callum? Hard to say. But he went on the Masters of the Air podcast and was talking about the two of them and their friendship and how close they were. And he says, Clevin, up until he died, talked about Egan. There's that anecdote. He was his best man at his wedding, and he said something like, should have been you and me getting married. And they just loved each other.
And everyone's like, what anecdote? No one's ever heard this anecdote.
Who told you that anecdote?
You know how people are always saying.
Yeah, everyone's always talking about that time at the wedding when he said it should have been you and me getting married. Do you guys remember that?
And everyone's like, no one else has ever heard that, Callum. Did that come to you in a dream?
I don't know. But
source unclear.
Source unknown other than Callum. Mm-hmm. But very sweet. Clearly thinks they have a lovely, close relationship. They loved each other. He's adamant that they loved each other, and that will honestly come back momentarily. Mm-hmm. So that's Callum's take on the situation. He's much more verbose than Austin Butler. So we don't have a ton of Austin Butler quotes about them, but we do have a little bit here talking about their relationship. He also, both of them are focused on this yin and yang thing with the two of them. He says about their relationship, so they're yin and yang, and they were both talked about as being the two best pilots in the 100th Bomb Group, calling the men leaders amongst their squadron. Similar to Bucky, Buck joined up before Pearl Harbor, and Austin says they both had these hearts of gold. Ultimately, it's their bond, Butler says, that interested him in the project. Quote, their friendship is really the thing that drew me to this so much, seeing how much they cared for each other, even though they were so different. And Callum Turner, who's also here for this interview, says, we really were best buds, loved each other.
Thanks, Callum.
Thanks, Callum. So that's our actor boys.
Yeah.
But we have one more creative force within this show to hear from.
Right.
Not with their words.
But with their actions. A little bit unusual, not someone we usually, quote unquote, hear from. But there's a little bit of subtext, a little bit of evidence planted by the set decorator.
Little seeds for people to catch with their eyes if they're willing to watch and rewatch.
The set decorator had some ideas.
During the scene when Buck has come back home and his trunk is still there, somehow, and he's looking through all of his belongings, At the top of his box is his stack of books, and on top of the books is the book More Poems by A.E. Housman. Now, as a not poetry nerd myself, you don't know much about poetry either, we never would have caught this. But apparently, A.E. Housman is for the boys. He is known for his homoerotic subtext in his poetry, writing about his relationships with various men. There were some lovely poems. I read some of them after finding this out. In this book in particular, in the first poem or in the foreword or whatever of the book, he says that his poetry is, quote, for all ill-treated fellows, which is a lovely way to describe your fellow gays.
What I do also like about this particular book planting is, yes, not a poetry person, but I would say that Housman is not like the most famous poet.
Honestly, not even the most famous gay poet. They could have.
It feels quite pointed.
Yes.
Yes, because they could have gone with your classic, your classic Walt Whitmans.
Yeah. And it would have been like, ooh, is that subtext? Maybe. But also he's so famous that it's like, yeah, anybody could read Whitman. But would anybody read Housman?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Very interesting. Very interesting from the set
interesting
decorator.
Yep. Okay. That's our events. That's our quotes.
Those are our things.
Those are our things. The show's not over. We also have the fans to consider, and the fans are making fan works. So we went to AO3 as we always do, and we did it for all 3 of our projects. And there's a fair amount of fiction going on for Masters of the Air, which I was impressed by because it's a limited series, and sometimes those come and go, and it's hard to sustain a fandom around them. But there are about 2,000 Masters of the Air fics, and about 1,300 of those are Bucky. So quite clearly the biggest ship in the fandom.
Nice.
Then we went to Wings, and we found 6 fics, baby.
Hell yeah.
And all of them, 100% are Jack/David.
1927.
It's thriving.
But unfortunately.
Sadly, yeah.
Ugh, tragedy. We tried to find some test pilot fic. None.
I looked on fanfiction.net. I was like, is there anywhere? These people need to be written about. They're so in love.
Thruple opportunities.
I know. Test pilot. Why is there no fic for you? I want someone to write a fix-it where he doesn't die. Please save Spencer Tracy.
I was like, maybe it's a nightmare that Clark Gable has, and he wakes up, and that's empathy enough for him,
Yeah, I was gonna say, because the problem is if he doesn't die, then is he going to develop the empathy to stop being a pilot?
He has to have a very vivid nightmare or something.
Yeah, he just wakes up one day and is, in his bed that I'm sure the 3 of them are all sharing at this point. And he's like, guys, I have to stop being a pilot. And they're both like, great. Thanks, buddy.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Go back to bed.
Okay. So, unfortunately, no test pilot fic, but we read the most kudos Wings fic, and we read the most kudos Masters of the Air fic.
Correct. So, I can tell about the Wings fic if you want.
Sure.
The Wings fic is called Bad Luck by Schweinsteiger. And this had a lovely little foreword from this person who was like, I love these boys from Wings, and I went on AO3 and there was only one fic about them, and I just couldn't let that stand. So I wrote this just for myself, very self-indulgent fluff, but here you go. And I was like, great, good work, buddy. So this fic...
Be the change you want to see in the world.
Be the change you want to see in the world, exactly. I think she even wrote direct action in her foreword. So in this fic, the 2 of them are at war. They're doing their missions together, etc., etc. One day, they're supposed to fly a mission, and it gets grounded because of rain. And the 2 of them are in their little tent together, having their lovely rain day. And they end up cuddling, for lack of a better word. They have 2 beds in their tent, and they end up both laying on one of the beds and having a lovely little cuddle session. And it's very sweet. And we're in the perspective of Jack throughout this, who has been having some, feelings, thoughts about David. Not sure what to do with them. Not sure how to deal with this. It's very confusing in whatever year. We're during the war, so 18-ish, to figure out what this means. But he's confused because he also thought he loved Sylvia, but instead he's like, when I think about my life post-war, I really only want to be hanging out with David. Is that an option? for me. Just Jack and David hanging out. Maybe, who knows? So they have their little cuddle, and it's very sweet. And he's like, this is very fulfilling. Gosh, I love a cuddle. And they sleep. And then later on, they have leave. And while they're cuddling, they're like, when we're on leave, I think David says to Jack, when we're on leave, are we going to be separated? And Jack's like, no, why would we be separated? And David says, I don't know, maybe you want to go off and find a girl. And Jack's like, no, I love hanging out with you. And so then they go on their leave together, and they have to get a hotel room. And of course they have to get 2 hotel rooms because it wouldn't be right for there to only be one. But then David's like, you can go out without me. I just want to stay and get some rest. And Jack's like, I don't want to leave without you. So they yet again do a little cuddling on the bed. Aww. And they have a conversation where David is like, he's been having the same experiences as Jack. He's been thinking about how he, only wants to be with him. And Jack's like, I only want to be with you. And they decide, we should be together, whatever that means for us in 1918. But it's very sweet. The whole thing is fluff. It's cuddling. It's them deciding that they want to be together. And they're like, screw Sylvia. Who needs her? All I need is you.
It is. It's very cute. It's very sweet.
Yeah.
I think Schweinsteiger did a great job, even though she said, I don't know how good it is. I thought it was lovely.
It was quite sweet. I mean, fluff is like always a good time. I don't know why people feel like it's not worth writing fic if there aren't going to be life and death stakes to it. Sometimes when the media is about life and death stakes, it's nice to have a little fic that's just some snuggling.
Mm-hmm. Nice work.
And when she wrote this, there was only 1 Wings fic, and now there are 6.
Wow.
So,
keep it growing.
Yeah.
Okay. So then our Masters of the Air fic is called You Go to My Head and You Linger Like a Haunting Refrain.
Damn.
By Moon Rocks. And I thought this was also a very sweet fic. We have our boys. They go out to a pub together one night and they pick up some ladies.
Well, no. John picks up a lady. Buck's never picking up ladies.
No, because he got Marge back home.
He's
he's a taken man. But he's the designated driver, and he drives John and the lady back to the lady's house, for fun times. And he's like, all right, have fun. I'll be out here for you when you're done. And you're
just
like,
going to wait in the Jeep while you guys get up to whatever you're getting up to in there.
That's so strange. He's like, I'll be out here. And so John is making out with the lady on the couch inside her house. And then he notices that Buck is just in the backyard throwing pebbles into a fountain. He's like, hold on.
Gotta pass the time somehow.
Hold on, let me go out and talk to my boy. And he's like, if you want, you could go home. I can hitch a ride. And, Buck doesn't say much. And he's like, are you okay? Like, are you
kind of weird?
Yeah, you're being kind of weird. And out of nowhere, Buck pushes him up against the wall and kisses him passionately. And then he leaves. And
John's like, huh?
What? He's like, oh, that lady didn't see. And then he goes back inside and she's like, everything okay? And he's like, yep. And he sleeps with her, but his mind is elsewhere.
He's distracted. But what, is he going to not sleep with her?
No, that would be awkward. Very awkward.
Yeah, totally.
So anyway, makes it back to the pub, and the other guys are there, and the Barry Keoghan character couldn't get laid, so anyway, they all head back to base.
Poor Kurt.
Yeah. And so obviously he gets back to base, and he's like, oh, still thinking about that. That was pretty crazy, huh? And he goes to bed, and Buck's not there, and he's like, is Buck gonna come back to bed? I don't know. He never sees him. He goes to the mess the next morning, and Buck is there reading the paper, drinking some water with some Alka-Seltzer.
Super normal.
So normal. But Bucky is, able to tell that, he's got his, nervous habits. He's being too precise. So I'm like, should we talk about this? And Buck's like, not in here.
Not in the middle of the mess hall, you lunatic.
So they go outside. And Bucky's like, I'm not going to tell anyone. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. You don't need to do a transfer. I'm not going to tell anyone. You're not going to get, drummed out of the military or whatever would happen. And Buck's like, okay, cool. But then Bucky just can't stop thinking about it.
It's just something scratching my brain about that incident. Yeah, I don't know why.
He's really like, maybe I'm feeling some feelings. It's hard to say.
It's always hard to say when you're feeling some feelings,
Yeah.
It's tough to tell what's going on up there in the John Egan Dome.
Yep. Also, when they first go out, is that when Buck is like, you'd be fine if I died.
No, that's after Gale gets injured.
Oh.
So Gale flies a mission.
Yeah.
He comes back. He has a head injury. Some flak went into the cockpit and
He's bleeding a lot.
Scraped his skull, but his skull is fine. He just injured the dermis, but he comes out of the plane looking like death warmed over because he's like bleeding all over his face, and John's like, oh my god, are you okay? And he goes with him to the hospital, and they're like, you have to go to interrogation, and he's like, hell no, I'm going to the hospital. So yeah, the two of them go to the hospital. Buck's fine, but then yes, he's waiting by his bed for him to wake up, and he's like, you scared the hell out of me, and Buck is like, you'd be fine.
Yeah. But also he's like really hopped up on painkillers, and he's like, I meant the kiss. And now, the more to think about.
The first thing he said in the conversation after was like, don't worry, I was just I missed Marge and it didn't mean anything. And you're like, sure.
You know how you passionately kiss your friend and it doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean anything.
Especially your male friend in the 40s in the military.
Exactly. Your best friend in the 40s in the military. And John is having thoughts like between that and the near-death experience. Yeah. John is like, but why did he kiss me in particular? Like, was it me specifically? Could he have kissed anybody? I'm a little confused. So yeah, in the hospital on drugs, he says, I meant it.
Yes. And so now I get more to think about. He goes back home.
There's just a lot to think about.
He realizes thinking about Buck kissing is making him feel sorts of ways down below, you know. And then he gets really drunk, and then he gets into a fight with some other people, and he ends up in the drunk tank. And so Buck has to come bail him out of the drunk tank or whatever.
Buck with his what I imagine to be a 1940s style bandage, tied around his head.
And it's at this point, I think Bucky's still a little drunk, where he's like, I would not be able to go on without you. Like, what the fuck were you talking about, dude? And Buck is like, huh, what?
Yeah, and Buck's like, why are you acting out? And he's like, dude, do you not realize that I have been, like, agonizing over this since you kissed me? Like, you freaked me the fuck out. And Buck has no idea. Buck's like, I thought we just moved on. Yeah,
well, he was, concussed and on a lot of drugs. And yeah, Bucky's like, what did you mean you meant it when you kissed me? Like, what's going on? Like, why me? And then Buck eventually is like, because I love you, you old lug.
His line, which I love, is, guess I'm in love with you, Buck. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that is what's happening. I don't know.
And then,
they're in the middle of the base. It is daytime.
Sure, but there's no one around, and he kind of pulls him to the side, I think.
They say he pulls him behind their truck. Their truck is not big.
Yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
Realism isn't important.
And they kiss again, and they're in love.
Yeah, they're in love. It's nice.
That's the thing. It's very sweet. Mm-hmm. When the first kiss happened, I said out loud, "Oh my goodness!
Oh my goodness!" Buck Clevin, that lady could see you through her window. Oh my
goodness! Just a sudden and passionate kiss.
I do like a surprise kiss, and then afterwards, the other person being like, "Huh?" Like,
wow, this is really giving me a lot to think about.
I did not see any of that coming.
No, what could it mean?
What could it mean? Well, he's just kissing people at random, and I just happen to be there? Like, I don't really understand.
Could mean nothing.
Which could mean nothing.
Nothing. When your bro kisses you, it could mean nothing.
I guess sometimes your bro just, your sober bro who never does anything at the spur of the moment grabs you and kisses you.
Pushes you up against the wall.
Sometimes it just happens.
Yeah.
Totally normal event.
Do you want to talk a bit about how you've just generally been enjoying the fic in this fandom?
Yes, I do want to talk about that. So, I enjoyed this pairing, whatever my problems with the show. And then when I started to go to look at the fic to get ready for this episode, I was noticing lots of well-respected fics at the top of the thing. And I start reading them, and I'm like, you know what? These are delightful. I've read several now. Great fics, fun writing. And for myself, I tend to not enjoy period /fics because I just have this overwhelming sense of dread in my head that things are not going to work out for these characters given the era. And so then in other fandoms where people will write like period AUs, I'm like, that's not for me. I don't want to deal with the period homophobia. But somehow these fics are working for me. So I've been having a great time. Maybe I'll find some of my favorites and post those on our Tumblr or something. But I'm enjoying them greatly. Some fandoms, you start looking at the fics and the quality is all over the place. In this fandom, pretty much everything I'm reading is quite good. Good writers. Very literary. A lot of like character analysis pieces. What's going on in their heads. All of that stuff we were talking about through this episode of like, how is Buck so into Bucky and he's just like his dad? Like, what are we doing about that? That's very interesting to deal with. There's a lot of interesting character stuff with the two of them. So that's been fun. I will say I'm enjoying the fic greatly.
So we don't have anything once again in the fan creator interaction section because it's a limited series. So like they made the thing and then they released the thing.
Yeah, it's not like there's no feedback that will change what will happen going forward. I haven't seen any interaction between fans online and these boys. Yes. I mean,
and we mentioned there might also be some hesitancy to even ask questions because they're real people.
So they're real people. So nobody's like, but what do you think that they were getting up to? You know.
And obviously no fan creator interaction that we're aware of in our Wings or Test Pilot example.
Oh, if only.
Only people were asking,
Spencer Tracy and Clark Gable. What were you guys
who hated each other
in that scene where you were clutching each other?
They were thinking, I hate this guy.
That's always good chemistry.
It is. Clark Gable famously was holding Spencer's head and was like, will you just die already?
And he's like, no, I am going to milk every moment of this scene and everyone's going to fucking love it. And they did.
They will. And they did. He's like, I'm going to win some awards. He did win Best Actor that year, but for Boys Town, a different film. Damn, Spencer.
Spencer. What a good actor.
Mm-hmm.
I also love Myrna Loy.
You really do.
Really do.
I rewatched an episode of Columbo recently that she was in. I'd forgotten she was in it.
Myrna on Columbo? That's so fun.
She's in an episode with Blythe Danner, and the murderer, I believe, is John Cassavetes.
Oh, okay. What a
good episode.
What a plot, or what a cast.
It always is on Columbo. It always is. Okay.
All right.
Anywho.
So let us ask our questions. Is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon? Honestly, I think for the first two, we are in the pre-queer baiting era. That just was not a thing that happened. And for Masters of the Air, we have that issue of the real people thing. I really don't think that they were trying to.
I agree. But I would say of all of these, queer coding, Test Pilot. What else could possibly be happening?
1000%. I think the only possible readings of that movie are A, Spencer Tracy's character is in unrequited love with Clark Gable, or B, throuple.
Yeah. But any way you slice it,
those are the only options.
Queer coding. I would say Wings, not even necessarily. It's not really queer coded. They just have a lovely moment at death. It's so sad, guys. It's so sad. So sad. But Test Pilot, I don't understand that movie outside of it being queer coded in some way.
I don't see it. I don't know what the straight readings of that are.
Yes.
Which is why I'm now going to be asking about potentially gay men. Do you think they've watched Test Pilot one too many times?
Yeah. Seems like they watched Test Pilot a few too many times.
Mm-hmm.
Add it to your friend of Dorothy, Oscar Wilde reading, Test Pilot watching, whatever.
Exactly. That should be in Donald Faison's speech from Clueless.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Let's gender swap some people.
Hell yeah.
Now, there's an additional challenge with all of these in that they're in the military in the 40s and before.
There are women in the war efforts in all of these things, to be fair. Even in Wings, we have one of our main character women is there during the war effort being like is she a driver or something?
She's a driver, but she's not a pilot.
So the thing is, if we're gender swapping, we're going to have to do a little bit of work on what they're doing, because in World War I, there are not going to be any female pilots. In World War II, there were female pilots. They did not fly in combat, though. They were back home ferrying planes from place to place.
Yes. I don't know there were any female test pilots.
No. But you know what? I think there's a world in which you make that Spencer Tracy character a woman because he doesn't have to fly. Engineer. He's just an engineer. Yeah.
But why does she go up in the final mission with him?
I don't know. I mean, it's still just a test pilot. It's not like it's war. Like, there's some amount of suspension of disbelief that could happen where it's like, she's an engineer, and everyone's like, I can't believe you have a female engineer.
I do like a lady engineer.
Yeah. So I think that's the closest one where the characters as they are might work. The problem is, at the time, what you couldn't get away with is the two of them being roommates and best friends and all of that stuff where, like, I don't think that's going to work out.
They were roommates.
I don't think they could be roommates in 1938.
So, yeah, I don't know that the gender swapping works, really, in any of these to make it different.
You're just going to have to make the characters very different to get away with that. Yeah. Like, you're going to have...
And I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do
because
that.
Because in Wings, the boys need to have their whole ritual before they go off and fly. And I don't know that a throuple with two ladies and a man is more interesting than a throuple with two men and a lady.
Mm-mm. What if instead you gender swap both Spencer Tracy and Myrna Loy, and then Spencer Tracy and Myrna Loy are the ones who get married and continue to live with Clark Gable?
Oh, hold on. I gotta
That's a lot of mental arithmetic.
Spencer Tracy's a girl engineer. So Clark Gable lands in a field,
and there's a guy. There's a guy there, and then Spencer Tracy's character shows up with the equipment.
Yeah,
and falls in love with
the guy.
The two of them get married, and then Clark Gable is like, "What? I'm not going to let you just go live by yourself. I'm still going to live with you."
Okay, but then Clark Gable doesn't quit his job.
You do have problems there. I mean, he's still going to end up... But the problem you're going to have is that he and the guy can't be together at the end.
Right.
Even if they are in love, they can't, like, just be married. Because
it's not just going to bring a farm boy on his test pilot mission. Yeah, I think we got to leave it. I think we got to leave all these things.
I think all of them are best as they are. I'm just trying to figure it out, if it's possible.
No, I think we're a little stuck by the times and the roles that men and women could have in society.
Ugh, society.
Okay, I think we've talked about why it isn't canon across the board.
It's quite clear for all of them.
1, Wings, it's 1927. 2, Test Pilot kind of is canon.
Yeah, but also it's 1938, so they're not going to talk about it.
Yeah. And that should be our real people.
Yeah.
And the only thing we can invent is a firm handshake.
Firm handshake. The invented parts of their relationship are the least gay things about it.
Put her there, pal. Good seeing you.
Great work, champ.
Chum.
Glad you survived, buddy, old pal.
See you around. Okay. I think it's a 0 on the queer baiting scale across the board. Yep. Okay, great.
Correct.
Well, that was pretty fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. You, as someone who doesn't even like planes very much, still managed to find some things to enjoy about this.
You know, as much as I was not particularly interested by the plane flying in Top Gun, I was incredibly impressed by the plane flying in Wings.
It's really good.
I think it being 100 years old and me being like, but what? Huh? Yeah. Like, them doing that now, I'm like, whatever. You can film with an iPhone. Who cares?
Get over yourselves.
They're experiencing 5Gs. Whatever. But to do that in 1927?
Pretty cool.
And they had the special effects of, like, when the planes catch on fire and they go down and, like, the guns going off. Mm-hmm. It's so wild.
And they dropped a plane on a house. I mean, that's the kind of thing that even in Masters of the Air, they were like, we don't have the budget for his character to go through the door of that kitchen when he lands in his parachute.
We learned that in real life. When Buck went down, he pulled a chute and he like landed in someone's house. Like he came through the door into the kitchen, and they were like,
"Which is awesome." Do that.
It is awesome.
Why won't you let them do it?
But they had, I guess, a bunch of budget in 1927.
I was thinking watching it. How much did they spend on this movie? Because it's really quite something.
And they had to pay Clara Bow.
Exactly, and she's hardly in the movie.
Crazy. Okay, anyway.
All right, but that's the Flyboys, as we are affectionately calling this episode.
Yes. Check out Wings and Test Pilot, y'all.
What are we talking about next time?
So we've received a number of requests to do different MCU ships that we have not covered. And so we're going to revisit the MCU, do another little grab bag of multiple ships that we've received requests for, and just see what happens.
Exactly. Just see what happens. Roll the dice. We, on our own end, haven't even decided yet what all of the ships we cover will be. So if you have any ideas, get them in now.
Yeah.
But it's going to be just a collection of various MCU ships that we have not already covered. So if you don't know, the ones we have covered are Stucky and also Bucky and Sam. And also Captain Marvel.
Yes, we did Captain Marvel and Maria. Yep.
I think those are all of our MCU ships at present.
I believe that to be true also.
So send in your requests if you've got them.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, you can reach us with comments, questions, and concerns, and again, suggested ships, at ltbkpod@gmail.com, or find us on Tumblr at ltbkpod. We have a Discord now that you can find a link to on our Tumblr. And if you are enjoying the podcast, tell a friend, leave us a review, and subscribe. The next episode of Let the Boys Kiss will be out in March of 2025.